Good morning, everyone. I believe we are about to start. Matti, you have the stream is on.
Yes.
Yes, excellent, thank you. Welcome, everyone, to this very interesting session on crime foresight. My name is Natalia Ollus. I'm the director of HEUNI, which is the European Institute for Crime Prevention and Control, affiliated with the UN, organizing this event together with Krimo, the Institute of Criminology and Legal Policy here at the University of Helsinki. So a very warm welcome to this joint event on navigating the future. It's really wonderful to see so many of you here. We're very happy with the turnout. And the question we are about to discuss today is both, in a way, quite simple, but also very, very complex. What does crime look like in the future? I first want to extend my thanks to our co-organizer, Krimo, for this very interesting and excellent collaboration. HEUNI and Krimo go way back. We've been cooperating over the years. We've been actually located in the same premises when Krimo still was under the name of Ottula. So we really value this partnership. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Kimmo Nuotio over there, who is a longtime friend of HEUNI and who also used to serve on the HEUNI advisory board. So thank you for this cooperation and for the work with our institute. And for those of you who don't know HEUNI, we were established in 1981 at a time when Europe was divided, and the founding idea of HEUNI at the time was to act as a bridge builder between the East and the West. So our mission has always been to share knowledge, foster dialogue, and provide research and expertise to support both the United Nations and our partners in developing effective and functioning approaches to prevent crime and to address criminal justice issues. So over the past 4 decades, obviously the world has changed, our work has changed. Today, we work on international, regional, and also national research and development projects within currently 4 focus areas, including trafficking in human beings, criminal justice processes, gender-based violence, and also corporate social responsibility. So we work also with businesses and public procurement agencies. But the world is constantly changing, and maybe now even at a more rapid pace. So digitalization, globalization, and shifting geopolitical realities are transforming both the nature of offending and also our systems that are designed to respond to these crimes. New technologies enable also new forms of crime, while traditional crimes may take on new dimensions. And this calls for fresh thinking, collaboration, and foresight, and this is what we're about to discuss today. We're really fortunate to have an excellent lineup of speakers, and 2 of them represent HEUNI's advisory board, which is currently meeting here in Helsinki. So we have several members of our distinguished advisory board here present, and I'm very happy that you're all here. But first, I want to give the floor to Professor Andrea Di Nicola, who's an associate professor of criminology at the University of Trento and director of the Center of Security and Crime Sciences at the University of Trento and Verona. Andrea has an extensive experience in international research, and he'll share his insights into how digitalization is reshaping both crime and its governance. And then after that, we have Evwaraye, who's the Director of Strategy at the Ministry of Interior here in Finland. Ari will present the ministry's foresight work on crime-related topics and the challenges linked to the erosion of social trust and social capital. And then finally, we'll have a commentary from Dr. Matti Näsi, who's a university lecturer here at Krimo, who will offer his reflections on current crime trends and what they might mean for the future. And then we'll open up for a discussion and comments from the floor. So thank you very much again for joining us for this event, and I hope this will spark some new ideas and a dialogue among different actors. I also want to just remind the speakers that please speak into the microphone, because otherwise the audience who is participating by stream will not hear you. So try to avoid moving away from the microphone. So it's my pleasure to give the floor to Professor Andrea Di Nicola. Welcome.
So in this way, can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, so I won't move. Thank you, Natalia, thank you all. Thank you to HEUNI and Krimo. It's always a pleasure to be here in this wonderful city. And it's a pleasure to speak with you about what? crime in the digital age. In order to, let's try and have. I'm gonna give you the menu of this presentation today, and it starts from my background. I teach in a faculty of law. I teach criminology. I am convinced that criminology is an applied science. It's very useful for lawyers. It's very useful for policies, for prevention. And I spend all my professional life in doing applied criminology, so applied research in crime and justice. And in the last, let's say, 12, 15 years, I've been involved as coordinator in different research projects. So what I want to do with you is, let's say, a journey in first applied criminology and then theoretical criminology. And this journey brought me to, let's say, develop skills which are quite different from the skill I had 15 years ago. Now I'm quite capable of speaking with computer scientists, with psychologists, with also lawyers. I am a lawyer as a background, not only as criminology. I think that this journey brought me to understand that we as criminology need to speak with other disciplines and need to understand something about technologies. It doesn't mean that I am a technical guy. Honestly, don't ask me very difficult questions about technology. I'm not a cyber criminologist. Don't ask me difficult questions about cybercrime. I tend to say that I am a digital criminology. What does it mean? And let's start from my road to digital criminology. These are examples of what I daily do, not alone, but with several colleagues, now at the University of Trento and University of Verona. Can you hear me if I stay in? Yes, okay. And these are not recent research projects, applied research projects in criminology, but let's say some of them went back to 12, 13 years ago. Like the first one, Surf and Sound. It was the first European project, really the first, on digitization of smuggling of human being and human trafficking. So the links between traffickers, their action, between trafficker and smuggling networks, and the digital dimension. We concentrated on social media, and we applied what we nowadays, after 10 years, we may call digital ethnography. So we spend a month together with several colleagues. Some of them, of course, have to speak Arab and several languages, in order to understand how, especially migrant smugglers, were exploiting social media. And honestly, as a human being, at the end of the research, I was astonished, because it was all there, openly, telephone numbers, ads, posts, videos, and I thought, how is this possible? I mean, this is just evidence for investigation, and nobody uses all this information, and we, as researchers, are not using this information. It's strange, and I started thinking that my ideas should change, that the way in which I look at crime and criminology, and also my discipline, should have changed. Fake care, we did the same, and we worked with Interpol for 3 years on the trade of fake medicines. It was, again, more than 10 years ago. Fake medicines are sold and were sold, probably were more sold 10 years ago than today, online, on social media. Now, if you look for an advertisement or a post on fake medicine, it's impossible to find one of them. And there is a reason, even if there is possible to find many ads and many posts about human smuggling. So let's start to think why, because in the end of this presentation, maybe we will discuss also about that. Basically, what we looked at was understanding and analyzing through different instruments, also honeypot websites, which is a new method. You know, you build an honeypot in order to understand the behaviors of people using that kind of website, and in this case, buying fake, we were selling fake medicine, and in the end you say, okay, can I use this data and this information? I am a researcher, blah, 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 okay, ethics, whatever, we have to follow all the ethical protocol, and okay, yes, let's use my data. We use this data and this information, and we understand the interaction between, let's say, clients of medicines and potential sellers, and other, let's say, new methods. And in the end, and that was the first time in which I personally started working with computer scientists. We made an artificial, maybe it was not really an artificial intelligence, but the first type of artificial intelligence prototype to identify illicit e-pharmacies online, because at the time there was a new directive in the European Union which allowed pharmacies to sell online, which is now the rule. And so what we did basically is to develop like a method in order to identify, screen the web, identify these pharmacies, these online pharmacies, and attaching risks to the pharmacy being a fake pharmacy, an illicit online pharmacy. Again, e-security. We at this first project, again in Europe, it was again more than 10 years ago, on predictive policing. That was like a science or a discipline coming from the United States, using geodata, data which are localized, which are temporally and physically located, and use the data, past data about crime and reported offenses in order to project this information statistically, understand well where crime will go, which is something, a statistical investigation that is done within the police, since a lot. But here there was the added value of introducing artificial intelligence system and augmenting the data and the information, because what we did at the time was mixing up this kind of information with other variables, honestly coming from we were in Trento, from the local authorities on social, demographic, traffic, light, whatever you may think may influence crime. We had this data, big data, maybe at the time you used less this word, but anyway, a lot of information on how the city was living. And we also used, mobile phone data and mobile phone information, because these are the most proxy data, the best data you can use to forecast crime after recorded offenses. Why? Because we live, we move, and our movement is situational prevention, is classic criminology, neoclassic criminology, and our movements are connected to the opportunities we are targets. So basically, these instruments are looking at us as targets. So you can put all this information into a box, and then you can call, let's say, a computer scientist and say, I'm sure that all these variables predicts crime. Can you help me? That's basically what we do. And we do some forecast for the police officer in Trento, but also for the local authorities in Trento, understanding the why, the reasons, the causes of crime, looking into these boxes full of data. And again, I said, my God, I really like maths, I really like statistics, but this is too much for me. And so I started working with people knowing much better mathematics and statistics and computer science and data analysis than I do still now. And I understand that I needed them, and they didn't understand that they needed me. But again, let's go on. CREEP. We made a project on cybercrime and cyberbullying in order to develop artificial intelligence-based conversational agents. Victims of crime do not report. So it's done already for medicines, and these artificial instrument, conversational agents are used in order to, let's say, force a potential clients of the health system to approach the health system. It's the same also for extortion. It's the same also for bullying. It's the same people that do not want to speak. So through artificial intelligence, or few, let's say, agents that speak with them, imagine a young guy talking with this artificial intelligence system, saying, I don't want to talk with my parents, I'm really sad, I want to die, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and we also work with psychologists, understanding the dynamic and the psychology. We build profile of possible victims, and in a way, we construct this conversational agent, which is now used within the system of the Provincia di Trento, the local authorities where we work. We have done project on VAT fraud, which is a very organized white-collar crime in Europe. You know, you steal from the European Union, you steal money from VAT. We discovered that this is done nowadays through digital technology, online shell companies, false identity open online, the transaction of sales on virtual platforms. And again, that in order to understand the new trajectory, you need something new. More recently, we are developing within the center that I direct two projects. One is on cybercrime, exactly of technological cybercrime, cyber-dependent crime, the way I told you that I'm not an expert in. We conducted the first Italian victimization service on citizens and on businesses. But we open up this victimization survey also to new components, not only tech cybercrime, but also digital cybercrime. Like, do you leave your data online, and did it happen that this data have been used in order to burglary your house? This was not the question, but more or less in order to let you understand. So not purely technological cybercrime. And we looked for human vulnerabilities. And we understood through this survey that many human vulnerabilities, many physical, the way in which we behave also offline is a predictor of online victimization. So that many online victimization depends on the way we behave on offline. And that the majority of the attacks, the majority of the problems are caused by factors that are strictly connected with human factors, okay? And so again, that there is not a barrier between online and offline, that this barrier does not exist anymore. Okay. We were asked by the Ministry of Justice, this is a very practical example, the Ministry of Agriculture of Italy. You know, we have many geographical indications, like Prosecco, for instance. I think some of you have. If you never tasted Prosecco, you should. But anyway, this is but there is also Prosecco, or Parmigiano. There is also Parmesan online, but it's not the real Parmesan. And the rules within the European Union protect these geographical indications. But the problem now is that all our officers of the Ministry of Interior are used to protect this stuff physically. And they started to understand that the problem has shifted online. And they didn't know what to do. What we call Italian sounding, you know? Something that looks like Italian, but then you buy the product that is totally different. Which is a risk for the economy of my country, but also of other countries, because other countries also have many geographical indications. Spain, France, for instance, the cheeses, or what else. So what we did, mixing up computer sciences and criminology, understanding this website, understanding the offers, and so on and so forth, and working with a computer scientist, is building artificial intelligence system that identifies, investigates, and collects evidence on fraud against Italian geographical indication. This list could be much longer. This is what I do daily. I would say 90% of my daily routine activities are on this kind of stuff. But then I said, wow, I am a criminologist. I have to write something. I mean, I have to publish something. This is too applied. But what does this teach me? So what I did, or I tried to do in the last 10 years, in understanding the trajectory of crime and digital society, the mingling, the mixing up of crime and digital society. I have so many things to tell you that I will go very fast. And I will ask I will ask you to forgive me if I am too fast. What I want to leave you is just like a hint of this theoretical framework that I drove to my empirical studies, which are much more than the theoretical ones, okay? So it means that I had the impression we did not, and we do no longer live with technologies, but we live within them, that life is digital, and has already been said by many sociologists of digital sociology. And that also, the digital transformation do change our social lives, our social ties, our social component, but also crime and control. crime and governance. And this is a huge transformation, much more than we perceived, because we are living with it. And let's say we are living under it and within it, and we don't perceive these fast-changing elements. So life is digital, and as social life becomes digital, also deviance, crime, but also offender, victims, and this is quite important, formal and informal reaction, social reaction to crime are changing, and so we need to study them, and we need to follow these changes, especially if we want to forecast where we are going. Because it's much more difficult to forecast now than probably 15 years or 20 years before, because the trajectories are very fast. Let's start from crime and deviance. These are just trajectories. These are just theoretical features that the examples that I gave you are taken from some studies, but usually what I also do is empirical, especially statistical, and let's say quantitative criminology. So all these elements and features are taken from, it's my way of interpreting my empirical work. Digitization, we are talking about crime, criminology studies crime and deviance. What is going on with crime and deviance? Let's put it the way deviance, because it's too difficult for 40 minutes, probably it left more, half an hour I have left. So crime and deviance. Whenever I say what I do, people interpret this, you are a cyber criminologist. Not at all. I really don't like cybercrime. I don't wanna, it's too technical. It's too, if you look at phishing, if you look at certain forms of hacking, certain form of ransomware, you need to be a real expert, okay? But this is what we call cyber-dependent crime. It needs technologies. I'm much more interested in the rest. What we call cyber-enabled and cyber-assisted crime, which is traditional offenses transformed or facilitated by digital tools. So most conventional crimes that are now digitally assisted, coordinated, concealed, and it happens very often. And also the pandemic times accelerated this process. Also for normal criminals, very, very physical criminals, but it's happening also for our social behaviors. What I develop is the idea of a spectrum, that we have a spectrum of crimes, of offenses, and that there is a continuum along from physical to digital worlds, and that technologies along this spectrum in committing offenses, while we are looking at offenses, mediate action, interaction, organization of these offenses, and along this spectrum there is an hybrid zone, which is the zone which I call digital crime. I'll give you an example. And I skip something, otherwise my time won't be enough. Let's look at this. Extortion. I am an Italian, so I've studied for a long time organized crime, so I know a little bit about extortion. The way we look at extortion by organized crime in my country, is very simple. It's a physical act. It's violence. It's corruption. It's intimidation. You need to have the physical contacts. I just have to, if I am the mafioso, I have to come and enter a shop and just smile, because that smile is enough. And the day after I will be paid. You need that physical contacts. So this one is the totally independent extortion. But then while I was studying, I ended up in studying some very interesting research from Chinese criminologists, and they will look at extortion by triads, so Chinese organized criminal, to students, university students, that were, let's say, they loan money from these organized criminal in order to pay the taxes of their university, and then they extorted more money. And this extortion, which were very physical and done by organized crime, were done through WhatsApp. So again, a little more digitalized, always within a context of very serious, let's say, and very traditional organized crime. And then we move a little bit. Sextortion. So extorting behaviors, money, whatever, using image-based crime. You need a video. You need also a fake video. if we call about deep fake, for instance. You need a photograph, maybe of your ex-girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, but still you use that image to commit a crime which is done truly digitally, but then probably your intention is physical. You wanted to use that kind of digital, again, but you need some more tech, you need some information, especially if you need a deep fake, you need more technologies and more skills. And then there is ransomware. Isn't it an extortion totally and fully committed online? So this is the spectrum. Whatever crime you take, it works, this kind of idea. And my idea when we go to forecasting is that step by step, very fast, we will move to the end of the spectrum, which is totally dependent, or much more and more dependent from technologies. Authors of crime. So when I teach in my lectures, I say, we are going to speak about offenses, we're going to speak about offenders, about victims, and about social reaction in this course. So what I try to do is, let's say, understanding these trajectories for the objective, the deviance and crime, for the subjects, victims and offenders and victims, and then for the social reactor. Let me look at the watch. Some ideas, again, general idea taken from cases, taken from empirical evidence. Digitization transform what crimes are committed, but also who commit them and how, who commit them. We have like a technological extended authorship nowadays. We have a distributions we have a connection between humans, devices, and infrastructures, much more than we see, much more than we are still capable of perceiving. We do not want to perceive it, because it's probably is something still far from our way of reasoning. We have hybrid systems of actor. The sociology of actor network theory already 20 years ago was forecasting this. There will be an integration between machine and humans in social life. And this is step by step happening also for crime. Digitization also lowered the barrier for offending. If 20 years ago, to be a computer criminal, you needed to be a very expert of technology. Now you can use and you can have access to platform, tool, devices, they make you a very good potential offenders. And technology also spread the way of offending, of becoming a terrorist, for instance, of achieving your motivation for committing crime. And in a new world of motivation, the motivation is changing. This is something that strikes me. And I try to synthesize this like saying that nowadays, a part of the offending, of the offenders, have new motivation. There is a new logics of motivation, which I call performative, symbolic, and playful, which is linked to the power of social media and the power of media also in committing crime. But I will go back to this. Lots of information, maybe too much. I have studied the connection between artificial intelligence and offenders, and I'm truly convinced that very fast we will live in a world of interaction between artificial intelligence and offenders. These are just examples taken from reality. I don't want to read them because I'm sure you can. I think it's enough. Can you read it from upstairs? So I don't want to. These are examples of offending through artificial intelligence, offending against artificial intelligence, like you poison a training data system in order, so you deceive a machine in order to achieve a further objective, which is criminal. Or you can cooperate with the artificial intelligence to enhance or conceal activity, like, and these are clear examples taken from drug trafficking cases, using a bot to buy drug on the darknet, or using a drone in order to traffic drugs across borders. These are quite simple examples. They are happening. They're happening in life. They're happening for the new technological wars. Why should criminals behave in a different way? So these mean that hybrid offender, this is how I call them, will use and are using and will be using much more artificial intelligence. And this means that the human capacity, intelligence amplify human capacities and blurs the boundary between intention, automation, and accountability. These are my personal trajectories. What I call technological extension. The offenders will be, the offenders will be, and the technology amplify human capacity to commit crime. Distributed responsibility, it becomes a process, and it will become a process much more spread across human and non-human agents. Can be a non-human agent considered responsible for an offense? That will be the question of the future. There will be a time they will commit crimes alone. It's very, very close to our time. I would say 10, 15 years, no more. Democratization of access. Technical skills are replaced by user-friendly criminal tools and performative motivation. Some offending, especially online offending, looks for visibility, self-expression, a new digital identity. And this is expanding. A lot of let's say, some also physical crime are connected to this dimension. If I think at bullism, we are in this dimension. My personal example, I've been studying organized crime all my life. I mean, I'm an Italian criminology, what can I do? I would never say this in Italy, of course. One of my main problem is that also Italian criminology, and maybe you can understand why. Some of my old, let's say, PhD students, and I are much better professors than I am, they tend to say that cyber criminal groups are not organized crime. And for the one involved in organized crime, probably this debate, which is also an applied debate, is relevant because it's relevant also in terms of policy. Understanding digital criminal groups committing offenses together as organized crime or not has several practical implications. Okay. The more I study, for instance, the Sherlock database and grow and see evidences and justice and jurisprudence about criminal organized groups online, the more I understand that the judges are far ahead than criminologists. They just say this is organized crime. There is the evidence. This is an association, a new type of association. But we, as criminologists, say, no, this is not violent, this is not corruption, there is no corruption going on, there is no control, there is no intimidation, there is no evidence. But the real question is, are they commit crime in association? What are the new forms of violence? What are the new forms of corruption, of lying? How do they control their online territories? The fact that it's far from our logic, what we have studied until now, doesn't mean that this is not a new trajectory of organized crime. So we developed, together with some colleagues of ours, and we publish on Trends in Organized Crime, what we call the digital physical framework of organized crime, which is, let's say, taken from empirical example and empirical evidence. So we have our mafia-type organization and others, they control territory, they use coercion, corruption. Then we have hybrid organization, that as the one that I study, I did also lots of physical ethnographic research on human trafficked smugglers around Europe. And 10 years ago, they started telling me, I use internet. I contact my clients because they use through this. My ads are there. The way in which I recruit my men and get my guys in my networks is through internet. Wow. So there was a new way for very violent and typical and traditional criminal, the one smuggling migrants, to use, and they were like networks using the internet. So trafficking networks via social media. The way in which also their organization was let's say, the structure of their organization also depend on the capacity they had to use this internet. And then we have, like, example, ransomware as a service criminal groups. They are totally different. They have a totally different logic. They are a criminal enterprise. But still, some criminologists of the 70s in the United States say that organized crime is enterprise and nothing else. And this is the case. This is enterprise without corruption and without violence, or with new types of corruption and violence. So I think all the empirical example and all the trajectory we had speak about, let's say, these trends and digitization and about the spectrum. Victimization, and I still look at the watch. I have to finish by, let's say, 10:30. Is it okay, Natalia? A bit sooner? My God, 25, 20? What can I steal from you? 2025. Okay, so there's... In Italy, they say the professor can talk for hours and hours without saying anything, which I don't want to be the case. So victimization and victims in digital society. When I am in this very crowded room, because criminology is very appealing in Italy, I don't know why, I always say, what do you do to my guys and girls? What do you do with your mobile phones? Do you do that and that? Have you ever looked at the contracts that you just press and then whatever? And then do you use your GPS? Always, yes, professor. And do you leave your traces? Yes, of course, my iris and my finger and whatever. Where all these data are going? Many and young people, also probably more than older one. I mean, leave traces, leave data, leave information, and these will condition their victimization and speak about their risks of being victims online and offline. And this is a new reality, which is very difficult to study, because the nature itself of harm changes, because digitization amplified, reproduce, reactivate across new time and new spaces harm. Victimization nowadays is I cannot say this word, I mean, the territorial aspects of victimizations are loosened, are vague now, and the same is continued. I mean, nowadays, if something happens online and you are victimized online, you can be victimized forever. If you are, let's talk about victimization of offenders. If you are an ex-offender and your data goes online, you will be lost, because you will be a criminal forever. You will be labeled as a criminal forever. And this is already happening. It is called shaming, online shaming, new form of virality. And this is new form of victimization, because we do not control data online anymore. So risk is no longer situational, but systemic, embedded in everyday connectivity. Again, we can have different hybrid forms of victimization, from cyber-dependent, data breach, ransomware victimization, or cyber-enabled, like being a victim of a fraud, of an online fraud, is very common. And it's a typical victimization process of a hybrid crime. But think about burglary planned through social media. So I look at your data, I know that you are not in your house, and I come and burglar your house. Think about stalking via GPS or smart devices. These are just physical examples of victimization, but which are influenced by technologies and the way criminal uses technology, but also the way victims use technology. And then we have like a cross-cutting concept between all these types, which I call datification. Exploitation through data visibility, through data profiling, a transversal process that increases exposure and risk across all forms of crime, from all forms of cyber victimization, from cyber dependent to cyber assisted. I will go very fast, and forgive me, but I have been studying, since I've been involved in several victimization surveys in Italy. I really appreciate, let's say, the results of these surveys and what we call victimology, and let's say the trajectory and the predictor of victimization. And this is the Dutch model of victimization, from opportunities to structural and cultural propensity. And under all these risk predictors, I put the new version, and I taken all this information basically from the victimization survey that we did in Italy, also the last one. Let's take some example. Opportunities. The structure of criminal opportunities influence risks, victimization risks. So it means that what do you do online, your personal and family activities, your business activity will influence risks, victimization risks. Yes, but all these extend nowadays into virtual spheres, extending and creating new exposure points. And what you do online and your family activity online and your family idea will influence, and let's say your personal activities offline will be connected, and there will be an influence from the online world to the online world. Specific risk factors like age, gender, income, residence, they mediate what we call digital literacy, technological guardianships, and so they will redefine, and they are redefining, so the digital society that interact with gender, with income, with this kind of variable, redefine vulnerabilities. Motivated offenders, if they are rational, really rational and not irrational, they will tend to select their targets through increasingly rational and data-driven processes. They will become more rational if they are clever, as all we are becoming more rational if we tend to use, we were speaking with Ari yesterday about artificial intelligence and the way we use it. But if we are going to use it well, if we are going to use it right, we will become better human being, more rational human being, better equipped, if we won't be exploited by artificial intelligence, but the opposite. Exposure, risk environment and offenders now occur both online and offline. So the time you spend in digital spaces creates new technological mediated pattern of vulnerability, of exposure to crime. Association, usually, tell me there's a saying in Italy, tell me with whom you go and I will understand who you are. Okay? And this is exactly also association and crime, or Sutherland says something similar, maybe better than the Italian saying. So the relationship between offender and victims can now develop virtually. But what happens virtually, if we have many cases, influence, and in these cases there have been an influence from online to offline victimization. And the victimization is taken from the virtual world to the also virtual area, to the physical world, okay? Dangerous spaces and time is the concept itself of spaces, of space, and the concept itself of time that is changing nowadays. So there are new places and new moments, and the use of this time over these places, think about very large platforms, very large search engines, activities, and time frames. I send an email at night, but immediately it will be on the opposite side of the world, and it's not night, and someone will go on working because I work here from 8 to, 16, and then my colleagues in the opposite side of the world can go on. I mean, time are totally different now. And this is exactly what will create new opportunities, new risks. Risky behavior, online imprudence, like the physical imprudence. But the physical imprudence of people will influence physical risks. The online imprudence influence virtual risks and physical risks. But we don't understand this cross-cutting. We tend to divide online from offline, but it's not anymore like that. High risky activities in digital space, they create risk exposure, and also defensive behavior. The likely of being victimized online and offline will be influenced by our behavior. It's like I started from the victimization surveys in Italy, where we found that the way we behave offline influence the way we are victims online. And then structural and cultural propensity. Poverty, deprivations, and marginality have always shaped victimizations. Criminology have long spoken about this kind of trajectory, but how these interact with digital environments. These may be reproduced and amplified, and digital environment introduce and are amplifying and reproducing inequality, generating new forms of stigmatization, and digitally designated victims is how I call them. Social reaction to crime. This is what I prefer, because I've always worked as an applied scientist with social reaction also technological reaction, because I am convinced that criminology is like medicine. How should you understand crime if you want to solve crime problem and prevent crime? Yes, you can, but probably it's just half of the apple. So criminology is very much connected to the study of the social reactions. I mean, the sociologists since Merton have always studied control and social reaction. Let me check, 10 minutes. So there are new informal social reaction. 5 minutes. It was 25, okay, 5 minutes. I put my clock at 25, but it's okay. Informal social reaction become network, algorithmic, amplified. Let me see, how can I do it? Social reaction. Think about Me Too, Black Lives Matter, doxing online, takedown, content flagging, demonetizations. These are done by algorithms, algorithm moderating systems, user exploiting alleged offender, collective moral campaigns. These are all examples, I would have needed probably hours, of new social, informal social reaction. But they are not only online. They influence our real lives. Also online lives are real, but physical lives. Think about predictive policing, algorithmic justice, the use of artificial intelligence in law enforcement, and so on and so forth. No longer, I mean, law enforcement are no longer human and digital injustice, step by step, we hope slowly, will become less human-centered and more human-machine-centered. There will be a data-driven, anticipatory, and algorithmically operational formal reaction. These are new formal reactions. So, and this will be linked to more private digital infrastructure, creating new dependency from official and public law enforcement agencies and private agencies, and also human beings. Many law enforcement campaigns are carried out through data taken from data crowds and data coming from the crowds, for instance. We have plenty of examples, but there's also a risk in that. So this is my framework, and I don't have time. Can I ask you for 2 minutes more, nothing else? Okay. So 5 minutes for this and then 2 minutes for closing. I spent with a couple of colleagues of mine several months in order to try and depict like a framework of the digital new reaction. And so we started from what we, as criminologists, knew to be the classic concept of social control. We have actors, we have mechanisms, we have times, so temporalities, we have spaces, we have norms, normativity, we have reactions, what we do when we see crime, when we see deviance as a society, and we have outcomes of this action. So the new framework, the new dimensions of actors. Actors are hybrid in informal social reaction. State, institution, family, peers become a hybrid constellation. States, platforms, citizens, and algorithm. Mechanism. First we had law, physical sanction, community disapproval. Now we have what we call algorithmic mediation, digital exclusion, algorithmic nudging, predictive automation, something like that. Temporalities, episodic, event-driven, you have the infraction, then I sanction you, then I reintegrate you. Or now we have an instantaneous sanction, permanence, record, predictive analytic, so the time is compressed. Then we have hybrid space. All the spaces of reactions, of social control were localized and territorial. Now we have online, offline context, we have deterioration of regulation. First we had norms like shared social value, codified laws. Now we had corporate codes, opacity, platform-specific regulation that we don't even know, the way in which social platforms behave and make us behave. This is what we call normative pluralism and contested legitimately. We also have amplified reaction and viral visibility for reaction. First we had local stigma, gossip, community shaming, whatever. Now we have online shaming, hashtag activism, digital vigilantism, virality. This is a viral visibility. It's an amplification of what we had before. It doesn't mean this is all bad, because we also had bad outcomes of social reaction before. It's true that we can have exclusion, bias, and inequalities, and there is this risk, so ambivalent outcome, but we can also have cooperation, safety, more effectiveness, if we understand also as criminology how we can use this kind of instruments. Then also, 20 seconds, the way in which we have to study this as criminology has changed. Agent-based modeling simulation, virtual reality experiment, web crawling, metadata analysis, virtual experiment, virtual ethnography or digital ethnography, computer-assisted, this is simple, quantitative analysis, I said I wrote it qualitative, space, present, time, data, knowledge, ethics, transparency is totally changing also for criminologists. There's a science of data and methodology, and there are lots of epistemological questions that we have to ask ourselves. And we are not asking, and many of, maybe also we are developing instruments, we are using instruments, but we didn't develop, let's say, a meta-discourse on that, which is the discourse of a science of digital criminology. So I think that as victimology was born from criminology, there should be a subset of study called digital criminology within this criminology. It is about doing criminology in the digital world. It's about how we study, what we study, who we study. It's about collaboration between criminologists, computer scientists, engineers, data analysts, and this is one of the most problematic aspects, because in order to do this kind of thing, you need you need collaboration with across discipline. Resist both digital pessimism and digital optimism. There's two opposite soccer field competitors. You want tech is bad and tech is the solution. No, we have to develop an ethical compass. Criminology and law should develop an ethical compass, and digital criminology should be an ethical compass. Why that? And so I bring also, and let's say the ball. I pass the ball to Ari, because I think that this digital criminology, if we are capable, and we will be capable of understanding the trajectories, of study the trajectory, will be also the science of the future. The more we understand this trajectory, the more we have in minds and in our hand the instrument to do that, the more we will use data, trends, weak signal to anticipate future risk and transformation. And the more we will be capable to detect early indicators of emerging criminal opportunities and vulnerabilities, and to do probably the work that Ari will gonna speak us about. So we will anticipate the emerging threats related to crime, but also crime control, AI-enabled frauds, deepfake exploitation, metaverse victimization, algorithm discrimination, human-machine criminal interaction. We are almost there, but we don't know how to understand these kind of things. So digital criminology for me is a mirror and a compass. It has to reflect digital transformation of crime, but also help society help navigate its future. I stole 3 minutes. Sorry, Natalia. Thanks for your attention.
Fantastic slides are showing. I guess I was going to say good morning, but it's 10:30, so I don't know if it's morning or early whatnot. Good day, everyone. Obviously, I'm standing here very much in awe, not only because of the previous presentation, but also because of the very accomplished crowd here today. There's people who know quite a lot about the things I'll be talking about. So I think I'll kind of pivot this to a more practically oriented narrative, and perhaps also something of a personal journey into this field. Obviously, I'm not an academic. I'm Ari. I work within the Ministry of the Interior. Currently, I head a small unit. I'm the Director of Strategy and Development there. But within this topic and Foresight, I've been working ever since you could say its inception in 2017, when we started doing this work, or perhaps kind of starting this sort of a focus. the orientation was very pragmatic. Previously, and this is perhaps typical to many settings, safety and security and crime-related questions haven't really been looked at from a foresight or a futures perspective, or I'd say perhaps there's a small group of academics, according to my understanding, at least what we found within the Finnish context. Why did we start this work? Well, obviously the Ministry of the Interior is responsible for the strategic steering of the police, and within our system, in the Finnish system, we're separate from the Ministry of Justice, who have the overarching criminal policy responsibility. But obviously, as we all here today know, the law enforcement approach and policing approach and perhaps kind of the whole architecture of society within the sphere of crime prevention is very relevant. So we needed this kind of view on things. Well, what we found, we had a number of challenges when we started. And why we started, perhaps, was that when we looked at reports, say, there's some representatives of the police, current and previous here, and I think you'll identify this. If you look at pre-2017 Ministry of the Interior or the police's reports on future trends in crime, they were more or less quite dystopic. It was a picture of threats and accumulating threats, and you always had some threat, right? And we always have some threat. And when we looked at this, we realized that, well, we did kind of a thought experiment. We looked 10 years back at these different reports, these scenario assessments that had a future orientation, and our kind of finding was that if all of the scenarios would have happened, we'd live in a very, very different kind of society that we couldn't even recognize. Now, this is not something we looked at to blame the individuals or people responsible for this, but rather kind of came to a realization that this is a very natural approach to future from an operational standpoint. If you look at kind of law enforcement organizations, it's their operational job to identify threats and potential challenges for the future, because when they arise, they're obviously something that need to be handled, and we need a societal response, perhaps a policing response, perhaps a broader policy response. That being perhaps a separate topic I might come into in a minute. So anyways, we realized that we didn't really have a foresight work or a foresight view from previous that would have actually kind of modeled how things actually went. Now, why did we need that? Well, obviously, working for the government and at the ministerial level, we needed to be able to kind of provide a credible outlook on things. What might happen, kind of the threat scenario, so to speak. Also, what might happen in a positive way, but also perhaps finding the middle ground and finding that the most likely trajectory of different things, where in actuality, for example, when negotiating budgets, when negotiating funding for law enforcement or the courts or whatnot, we needed to provide not only kind of the potential threats, the traditional model, and this is kind of oversimplifying it, we have all these threats, we need all this money to be able to kind of be prepared for these threats and tackle them appropriately. That's perhaps kind of an age-old tactic, so to speak, and it's by no means out of the window, and especially in kind of perceived high-threat situations, and to some extent you could argue that it's prevalent even today. However, from kind of a credibility point of view, we needed to be able to communicate that what kinds of positive changes will we have in society? Also from the perspective that, well, okay, these are the resources we have, these are the resources we might need in the future to be able to provide decision makers with the perspective of these needs will kind of go down. A great example I typically use, I don't know if it's a great example, but something I find really interesting, was that not so long ago, over 10 years ago, I was the secretary in drafting the National Corporate Security, or Business Security Strategy, rather, not corporate, but business security, which was a cross-administrative. It wasn't by business and for business. They were heavily involved. But one of the measures, it had a number of measures, I think 40 measures or so. One of the measures was a multi-administrative approach to decrease petroleum thefts, basically, because you had manually operated gas pumps, basically, at the gas stations. And that was a big thing. I think they recorded something like 40,000 cases, something like a huge amount for a small country like Finland annually, which were very cumbersome for the police because, you know, they were all individual thefts that theoretically, they needed to be investigated, and also huge capital losses, of course, for the gas station operators. So it was a big thing, relatively big thing. Now, we didn't anticipate, we didn't realize that just in a couple of years, this problem would be non-existent because most of the service infrastructure became digital. You didn't have manually operated gas pumps anymore that you could first pump and then go and pay for the purchase of gas, but rather you'd have to pay with a digital currency, with your card. And this is something we didn't anticipate at all. And if you look at 40,000 individual criminal reports that theoretically needed to be investigated, most of them actually, I think, probably went into kind of a passive register where if there was some footage or something like that and you ran upon the car somewhere during patrol or whatnot, they'd be apprehended and the investigation would start from there. So that being one thing, being able to communicate a holistic, probable picture of the future operating setting instead of just a threat-based what could happen and what we need to be prepared for. So that was a very pragmatic kind of intra-administrative approach to it. Another approach to it, obviously, which I think is more interesting and perhaps fruitful and perhaps more strategic, is obviously being able to communicate to the general public, to all decision makers and different actors within the value chain of crime prevention, if you will, and have this dialogue as to what's probably going to happen, what should we be concerned about, why should we be concerned about it, and what are the kind of most appropriate measures. I see people here who've participated vigorously in the public debate regarding kind of the different methods within crime prevention, if it's a law enforcement approach into a specific phenomena or whatnot. So through this dialogue, you came closer to understanding perhaps some of the root causes of what should be done on a policy level and whether it's a law enforcement issue primarily or another type of issue. Just to kind of give you something of a frame and perhaps to preface some of the things I'll be touching upon towards the latter part of my presentation, which I'll try to hold brief. Our political aim is and has been varied a little bit. Some years ago, we aimed to be the safest country in the world. Now previously we aimed to be the safest country in Europe, and then we said, well, if we're the safest country in Europe, we're probably the safest country in the world, right? So that was the aim not very many years ago. Now we're a bit more modest, but perhaps somewhat more qualitative, where we've attached ideas of trust and justice into our vision of security and safety and security. Now, what we found, obviously, as very well exemplified and in-depth exemplification within one specific field from Professor Andrea's presentation, obviously, is that the operating environment or the security and safety environment is increasingly complex, uncertain, and interconnected, and kind of doing one thing provides perhaps even of a lesser certainty in terms of results from a single branch's approach. And also it might be very volatile. What worked today might not work in 1 month. Previously it might be, well, in 5 years the world has changed. Now it might be that it doesn't work in a month anymore because of some technological advantage or advancement or a different kind of modus operandi within that frame. Can have gone technologically to a very different kind of approach into committing the same sort of crime, for example. Some might argue, and we face this argument within our system and within our ministry, that, well, this kind of makes foresight in many ways a moot point almost, because if it's changing so rapidly, what's the idea? And we used to have, when we started 2017, we used to have like a 5 to 10 year period. I have to admit, it's becoming more and more challenging to do a 5 to 10 year kind of time frame within foresight in crime, safety and security, but also arguably any field. We know from the advancements within AI, I just told Andrea yesterday that I'm a fairly new AI convert, so to speak, in regards to kind of its potential to transform society very rapidly. And these are questions that could then imply that foresight is perhaps not so beneficial, and interestingly, we might be moving into a more kind of a reactive setting. Remains to be seen, perhaps. Now, obviously, this is probably quite known to all of you, have more or less an understanding of what the aims are. Our aim has been very clear in the regards that we've wanted to build kind of an anticipatory governance approach within not only the ministry and not only its administrative branch, but also a more widespread and anticipatory approach. Also, perhaps feeding into kind of the knowledge base of decision making, because foresight requires data, foresight requires understanding, foresight requires communication and engaging different stakeholders. It's virtually impossible to do from kind of an intra-organizational standpoint. Or you can do perhaps within very specific fields, but typically its nature is to be very systemic, where you have to take into account a number of different activities and kind of interests. One of the interesting and perhaps more ambitious parts of it also has been to be able to kind of go into a dialogue, or not go into, but deepen the dialogue with decision makers regarding evidence-based policies, where I'm saying this modestly, where we are not claiming to find causalities, but definitely looking for causalities. If you look at, say, a crime environment, criminal environment, or a society as a crime environment, that we have kind of plausible understandings of, if we do this, what it will lead to. And if we look at things in the future, what we need to kind of tackle, what we need to effectively and also in a very legitimate way counter, we need to understand kind of what the dynamics of those situations are, which again, I kind of go to say that perhaps in Andrea's presentation came forth that might be a big challenge, but that's not really a reason to not do it, because I think we're even more in the dark if we don't. But they're kind of the dual objectives that I from another perspective alluded to a minute ago, where sure, we need the preparedness-focused foresight, where we need to understand what will be happening in the future, perhaps future threats and whatnot, and our ability to react flexibly. But also, and I think this is also an enticing point, and this is very atypical to, I think, the security and safety field. What is the future we want? What kind of future do we want to create? What's our proactive stance on this? Because our nature is, at the end of the day, quite reactive. A threat comes up, or we anticipate a threat, and then we react to that. But also, what are the kind of positive drivers we can tap into through our own work or through networking that can create the kind of future? You've probably heard of the saying regarding comedians when they die on stage. You've heard when comedians die on stage, what they refer to is that they tell a joke and nobody laughs, and they tell the next joke and nobody still laughs. Well, I've had a couple of dyings on stage with foresight work when we've had police officials, we've had migrations officials, we've had border officials, and then we've posed the question, well, what does the future prosperous, safe Finland look like? Died once, and then tried a different approach. Well, what could we do to kind of promote a prosperous society and whatnot. Died a second time, and several deaths during this one event, but also a future event. So we've not really been very good at this. And kind of our approach in general towards safety and security, obviously traditionally, is the mitigation of threats, removing threats and mitigation of threats, where we don't actually kind of see, well, few of us, or not many of us, see kind of the, how should I say, proactive potential within what we do, the interaction between, for example, law enforcement and society, which has traditionally kind of been delegated into a very small subset of community policing officers. Right. Now, just 2 words on our Foresight model, how we work. We have a number of inputs. We have something called environmental scanning. It's an approach rather than perhaps a single tool, so to speak, where we utilize a broad network of professionals who do this within kind of their. We have very few. We have. Within our ministry, I'd say we have 1 full-time Foresight specialist, and other people work within Foresight, within our ministry, and also the branch of government, so that being police and border and rescue services, part-time, so as part of their task. And they conduct a constant environmental scanning where they look at different sources, and even everyday sources. It's encouraged that in your everyday life, when you read newspapers, when you see new phenomena on social media and whatnot, you feed it into kind of the common pool and common dialogue, and do a preliminary assessment of why this caught your attention. So very kind of human-based approach. Then we have the more formal agency risk analyses, which is kind of the traditional method, and that's of course a very valuable input. I'm not disregarding that as non-relevant, but rather perhaps more of a single source in the whole soup, or single ingredient in the whole soup. Then we have the government Foresight work, which I guess in international comparison is fairly competitive, the Finnish kind of government Foresight work, as well as, of course, international sources. And this is a continuous process. We do one bigger update annually on something we call trend cards. Sometimes we get new trend cards. We update old trend cards. I don't have a list. We have 16 trend cards right now, and they're of varying size, so to speak. And these are kind of the background drivers. We very rarely, we tried that once, we kind of brought our trend cards to our board of directors at the ministry, and it didn't really resonate. It was not too complex per se, but it seems that decision makers need kind of very concise proposals, recommendations on what to do, because A, then B, or because A, then either A or B or C. And this is something we need to prepare for, this is something we need to pivot within, and whatnot. Like I said, collaboration is key within the work. We also have kind of some output work. I won't delve into details into this because that's probably not the most interesting part of this, but we obviously utilize this work for cross-governmental reports. We have a very recent internal security report given by the government to the parliament, so this is a fairly formal process and procedure, which is grounded in our Foresight work. And when I say Foresight, it's obviously a combination of the current situation, kind of situation report, strategic situation analysis, then added with the spices of the future, so to speak. Right. Now then, looking into kind of focus areas that are of interest right now. One thing I didn't mention is some of the findings also within this work, and is that when we kind of started looking at this the policy area from a I wouldn't like to say a more strategic perspective, but perhaps through different definitions. We kind of operationalized the different definitions. What we found at an early stage was that, and this is another example I typically use, is that sentiment, public sentiment, and also different kind of, how should I say, not just political position, but also kind of view on the world, is really non-detachable part of the understanding of internal security and understanding of the security landscape. Let me elaborate on that. In Finland, annually, 2,500 people die from accidents at home. Around 200 people die from traffic accidents. Less than 100 people, around 70 people, I think is variation, but less than 100 people die from homicides. And during the last 120 years, 4 people have died from terrorist attacks. So looking at objective figures in regards to, say, if death is a kind of a commonly, quite morbid, but commonly acceptable measure of the different kind of prevalence and threat level of different phenomena, we see that this doesn't correlate at all with what we perceive as threats. It's not so many years ago that people, and especially in certain areas, were afraid of violent deaths through politically or religiously motivated violence, i.e. kind of terrorist type of attack. People might even go on the orange Helsinki metros at some point, and we're kind of worried that, well, will I be the target of an attack? Whereas virtually no one, very few, and at least of the people who are kind of typically victimized with this, that being middle-aged men like myself, are worried about dying in accidents at home, which is, well, by an order of several magnitudes more likely. So what we found was that when kind of navigating the concept of threat and what we perceive as threats, objective measures aren't really enough. And that's something we needed to incorporate in our foresight work. And it took us a couple of years because we kind of tried to find the silver bullet as to, well, this is the threat, this is not a threat. And kind of tried to counter-argument, in a way, the different kind of emphasis that should be put on different phenomena. And failed, ultimately, at some point, because the power of sentiment is so strong. But I think this is an important underlying factor that we just simply needed to kind of accept and take into account. Why do I talk about this now? Partially because of the phenomena that currently currently been for the past couple of years, has been under focus and also subject to a lot of public discussion and also debate and also political discussion. Youth and gang crime. This is something that, like said, has been a focal area and something we're looking into. The main kind of popularized concern, and I'm not saying it's not a valid concern by any means, is that we are in a trend within this phenomena in this country that has the potential to kind of change society and the fabric of society, and especially in urban areas where segregation, underprivileged settings, linking to immigrant backgrounds and different kind of very typical, how should I say, gang crime related settings will change the fabric of society where there's an idea or a thought or a fear of certain areas within the Helsinki region, for example, transforming in a permanent way so that they are lawless areas. And obviously this is, of course, a very major concern, because we know from international example that once these types of transitions, like we know from organized crime, more traditional organized crime, that once the transition has kind of gone far enough, it's quite a bit harder to kind of turn back time or kind of retransition into a different sort of residential area or area. So this is, of course, a valid focus. Nevertheless, currently it's my understanding that the understanding, and I know there's people who know more about this theme here than myself, is that at least, the number of individuals, young individuals, partaking in this sort of activity and around this sort of activity, and perhaps in some ways in risk of becoming youth gangsters, so to speak, is still fairly small. Now, what we're obviously interested in is kind of the tipping point. If you look at the crime as a whole, in Finland, we have a very kind of, and I think this is common for many other Western countries, if not even globally. We have a decreasing trend where crime is going down, all in all, but we have certain pockets within crime that, that perhaps aren't going the same way, and also the dynamics within these pockets differ somewhat from previous dynamics. Obviously, digital crime being one of the major areas where this sort of thing is happening. But in regards to this question, kind of the interesting questions we're looking at is what are the partially traditional drivers of youth and gang crimes. They're very universal, as we know, and you don't have to read many studies in criminology to kind of find, well, what drives youth crime. It's certain questions of being underprivileged, certain questions of concentration within a specific area, low social support, formal and informal social support mechanisms. But what are the new potential questions? As we know from history, we've had gangs in Finland before, obviously, youth gangs before, and Finland, and especially Helsinki back in the 90s, 80s, 90s, was a very violent setting. You'd walk around the main train station, for example, at night. It would be quite a bit more dangerous to walk around there back in the 80s, 90s, especially as a young male, compared to today. But still then, are there differentiating factors that are present in the current setting that differ from previous? Well, we know that obviously to a fairly big extent is narcotics, and also the if not cybercrime, the cyber element of it. What does it bring? How does it change the whole picture? So this is something we're quite interested in. Our current assessment is that crime will probably, and especially kind of visible crime and street crime, will probably look a bit more like we think it looks like today, where it's a small number of actors, but are perhaps a bit further into the lifestyle, if you will. So we'll have a fairly small number of young people, and perhaps in many ways noticeable group of young people who will be engaged in this, whereas kind of as a whole, the phenomena will probably be decreasing. So we'll end up in a more polarized picture of youth and gang crime. Luckily then, what's been done on the basis of this is obviously, what's the word yesterday you used, Julia? Focused deterrence. That's been the strategy of the Finnish, kind of the traditional law enforcement approach has been focused deterrence, where you look at kind of the main actors, the leaders of networks that are not necessarily formal leaders, but are nexus individuals within this. And this is kind of a very, how should I say, very tried and true method of approaching bubbling under organized type or crime that's taking more organized and socially organized forms. And that seems to, this is still cautious, early days, but seems to have kind of borne fruit at this current stage of the phenomena. At the same time, I'm happy to say also that we have quite a high level of awareness in regard to these issues within non-law enforcement decision-making and non-law enforcement actors, i.e. cities, third sector organizations who are active and are able to address the kind of the other underlying challenges where law enforcement and policing would be more of a blunt instrument. I won't talk about violence in general to a great extent. I think it kind of intertwines with what I just presented. On a general level, again, people are more at home, and people perhaps might be more at home in the future because there's less and less of a need to go out to kind of take care of our needs. Young people don't hang around, right? We hang around in digital settings, online, and there's quite a good body of research on this. Of course, that has a lot of detrimental national health effects, of course, and we should be worried perhaps from those perspectives. But then at the same time, we see an emergence of digital violence and obviously the digital arena as a setting for crime. Now, another big thing, and we're in fairly early stages of this, so it's something of an amoeba, but we've started to look at social trust and cohesion as a strategic asset. We've entered a cooperation with the University of Helsinki and Sitra, which is the, how does it translate? I guess it's the Finnish Futures Fund, perhaps, which is a think tank organization national think tank organization working towards a better future. Now we're trying to deepen our understanding. There's a fairly broad number of actors who see currently an erosion in the social architecture that has made Finland. And this, some of us argue, is a strategic asset whose importance we haven't really realized. I used AI last week for a presentation on this topic. We had a meeting on this topic with a task group, so to speak, last week. And what AI told me, and I had a very easy time agreeing with this, is that social trust has been this sort of strategic asset on which the whole safety and security infrastructure in this country has been built. And and losing social trust and social cohesion might lead us to a situation of the frog in the water, where the water starts boiling slowly and the frog doesn't realize this, i.e. our police officers' main tool or main weapon, if you will, isn't the sidearm they've been carrying, but it's the social trust that they've been endowed by the public. And losing that weapon, again, might actually have a bigger impact that we understand. What the AI told me, and again, I had an easy time agreeing with this, if you look at different kind of aspects of it, the whole safety and security infrastructure, we have a common conscription system, the military service system. We're seeing an erosion in people, not kind of socially detached individuals, but rather Finnish-born, culturally integrated, kind of regular Joes. It's still predominantly male, and it's compulsory only for males. An erosion in the willingness to defend the country. While at the same time, our message to NATO and other actors is that, well, we have a big army, relatively big reservist army. Well, we're seeing a small erosion there. But this just kind of as the fundament of the military defense architecture is definitely a challenge. Another thing we saw, and this is perhaps closer to home in my case, and relates to the question of the police officer and their kind of most important weapon. We have this narrative of, we typically say from the resource standpoint, we have the least police officers per capita in Europe, and we need more because we don't compare to Sweden and all these other countries. Well, if you turn it around, we've afforded this. This is something we've afforded because the architecture has been different. The elements of social control, social trust, have done the policing, so to speak, in a very cost-efficient manner. The problem is, I can't say directly that, well, we should put resources here, there, or there to kind of reinforce this or keep this going on. Rather, it's something that's present through the different institutions, interactions between human beings, and so on and so forth. And the third example that the AI provided me was, of course, then the preparedness work that our businesses voluntarily do. So basically, our crisis preparedness is based quite a bit on different businesses' voluntary preparedness planning, where they say, look at different scenarios. Well, okay, if this happens, together with the authorities, if this happens, we'll be able to do this, this, and that, and common planning. So how we kind of go through hard times together, which in many situations might be kind of counterintuitive in regards to the maximal optimization of the business opportunities. Some figures on this. We have a high rising level of bitterness, for example, within especially young people. We have a rise in the acceptance of violence. From the total population, 10% currently accept the use of violence to achieve their own goals. Now, if you look at perhaps the more relevant groups within this, if you look at males under 30, the number rises quite a bit, and we're almost close to 1/3 of this population, which is, I wouldn't like to say alarmingly high, but it's quite high. 1/3 of the kind of potential perpetrators of ideologically motivated violence would accept the use of violence to further their own goals. But this is definitely something we'll look into more, what type of violence and under what circumstances, because this obviously is a key driving factor as to what we need to be looking at in the future. As a summary, I don't want to be alarmist in regards to social trust and its impact, but it seems that we in many ways are on something of a trajectory that might lead to partial, if not full, but at least partial loss of one of kind of the more fundamental elements of our safety and security architecture. And this is something we need to understand more. Currently, we're not in a foresight phase in regards to this, to be fully honest. Rather, we're just coming to grips to understanding the importance of this invisible oil, so to speak, in what kind of society we'll be living in the future, or might be living in, and what kind of society we want to live in, and what we need to do to be able to live in the kind of society we want to have in the future. Just very, very briefly, there's criminologists here, so you have a better understanding, quite a number of you have a better understanding of the crime trust feedback loop as just a very kind of operational view on it, where kind of reduction in social control leads to a higher propensity to committing crime. That, of course, to some extent counteracted by then general criminal activity and kind of people's general tendency to perhaps stay at home more. I can't end without mentioning AI, so this is the last thing I'll be talking about. Right now, we're in the phase of kind of attempting to renew our foresight and the performance management through the use of a strategic AI analysis initiative. Like I said, we have one person doing full-time strategic foresight. We see that there's big potential in the different aspects of the foresight work and also kind of the planning work, policy planning work, that could be not, they couldn't replace the individual perhaps, but definitely we could bring quite a bit of effectiveness into the work, especially in regards to looking at data and looking at research and utilizing research, because that's something we've not been as good at as we could and should have been previously. We had a very good discussion about this, I think some formal and informal discussions yesterday during the HEUNI board meeting in regards to why and how research and evidence-based impacts policymaking. And I'm the first to admit that we haven't really been good at this. Of course, there's the element of political steering, but nevertheless, kind of we have to provide the best available knowledge for the decision makers, and then of course leave it to the democratic system. But we have to be transparent and as good as possible so that the decision making would be evidence-based to the degree that we wish and is kind of humanly and machinely possible. I think I'll conclude there. Thanks a lot for your attention. Yes, Hyvä.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the great presentations. My name is Matti Näsi. I'll do the commentary here, and I'm exceptionally happy to listen to these presentations because I think my little commentary and my few slides here fit it quite well. So I'm a university lecturer here at the Institute of Criminology and Legal Policy. And our institute we are located within the University of Finland. We used to be, our previous 10 years ago, we're still part of the Ministry of Justice, but now we're part of the university. And we have a specific task of providing information on crime and crime trends. And it's based on law. So this is a very peculiar setting that we are, by default of law, required to produce this type of information. And hopefully what we aim to do is to provide this type of information for decision-making processes and people who are making in the power of decision-making, so that they have the best possible tools and best possible information available for this type of decision-making. So we touched upon on two kind of somewhat different perspectives in our two presentations. One is perhaps the more of the future challenges we are facing with the cyber world and the digital threats, but we are also looking at the current situation in Foresight and why making predictions in the future is difficult. What we do here in Krimo is we provide population level surveys, survey information on crime trends, victimization, both on adult population and youth crime, as well as homicide and serious violence. So we are using both the sort of a survey basis as well as a different register data to trying to combine the bigger picture. So we're really trying to provide information that is the best that we can get, but it's also objective, and we hope that we are a friend for all of these other institutes in Finland in terms of cooperating and providing information. So why we do these population-based surveys is that if you want to predict the future, or if you want to try to understand the future, predicting the future is extremely difficult, but we provide this information so that we understand the past and we kind of see long-term trends, so we have a better picture in the big picture of how things are evolving. So what's been interesting in these surveys is that if you look at sort of mass crime, classical types of crime, violence, property crime, etc., we see that since we've been collecting this information since 1980s. If you look at victimization on sort of classical physical violence, injury-causing violence, not much has really changed in the past 40 years. The trend hasn't really changed much. So if you look at this sort of classical trend, it looks like what it looks like, not just in Finland, but in many Western countries. The crime trends, they're perhaps more in the down rather than on the up, if you look at the sort of traditional victimization trends. So with violence, there's been very little change over the past 40, 45 years. We have positive news in Finland in terms of the most serious form of violence, homicide, like Ari was mentioning, now about perhaps 70 casualties, homicide casualties per year, but it's been going, the trend has been positive throughout the 2000s. So we have this sort of positive outcomes as well in terms of looking at the trends in certain types of offenses. Homicide has perhaps been the success story in Finland. Finland has been a high rate homicide country for decades and decades and decades, but finally I think things are starting to look better in that sense. If you look at property crime and per household, we also witnessed in the past, let's say, 10 years, gradually declining trend, positive trend in that sense as well. So we are looking at these sort of challenges in the sort of traditional sense. I think we are seeing more positive trends. And if you're looking at sort of future foresight, we have things to be sort of, I guess, in many ways, happy that things are going in a better direction when we look at this sort of traditional crime setting. Youth crime was mentioned. Also, we have two types of development in youth crime. We have the overall sort of population-based level trends in many forms of youth crime, which have been positive over the past 30 years. But like Ari mentioned, we have these pockets of youth offending, serious offending, that are collecting offenses from an early age that is still and continues to be a challenge. And I think that's a trend that we need to be monitoring. But at the same time, the digital era has a number of different significant changes, and I think in the criminological research field, what we've also witnessed is that technology is changing the way we spend time. Youth don't no longer spend time in big groups outside as they used to in my youth when the town square was the meeting point for drinking and meeting with your friends. That doesn't happen at the same rate anymore. Technology is provided new types of ways of spending time, and it also affects how youth behave in the bigger picture. But what's the challenge for future trends in crime is, like Andrea mentioned, the digital crime, and that's the only sort of negative trends or patterns that we're starting to see related to the digital era. We have the harassment, the sort of online behavior, that it's always been a big challenge. But we see small gradual trends even within the past, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years, where we see data breach increasing, misuse of personal information, scam frauds related to online goods and services. We have gave up personal information as a result of phishing, identity theft. We see all these small margins and small changes that are, the trend is going to the wrong direction. If you think about, let's say this one, gave up personal information as a result of phishing. If you go to the personal level in terms of who's been victimized as a result of this type of behavior, usually the loss of funds or money is significant. People lose their entire savings as a result of being as a result of social engineering. A lot of this larger scale phishing, malware, ransomware, all this type of offending is related to the organized or network crimes, as Andrea was mentioning. So we are seeing a combination of organized crime entering the sphere of sort of everyday people and their everyday life. So crime is changing. It is perhaps not changing so much in its traditional forms, but it's changing in its cyber forms. And I think this is something that we need to be really aware in the future. And I would like to see a better and more fruitful collaboration in the future with all of these sort of institutes we have in Finland, because we are a small country. I think we need all hands on deck in terms of providing this sort of support network and understanding on where we are going with these future trends. So hopefully Krimo can also be a sort of a friend in need, in this sense that we can be a partner in providing information and skilled research in tackling these issues in the future. So this has been an interesting setting and interesting discussion, and seeing all these presentations before, because they raised exactly these issues. They raised this issue that this is an increasing challenge. Ari was mentioning a lot of things in their foresight, and it's difficult to foresight this type of things because the technology is changing so quickly. Traditional crime, I think, is perhaps a bit more easier, seeing where it might be going in a population level. But this is, we don't know what the next big thing is going to be. And the challenge is it's so organized, it's transnational, and it's crossing boundaries. So from a police perspective, I'm sure it's also a difficult challenge. So hopefully we at the Krimo will be able to provide this information also in the future and be a collaborative partner in how to deal with this information. But I would like to thank you, the great presentations. I think they were very insightful in terms of understanding where we're going with these future trends in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrea, Ari, and Matti. We will now open up the floor for some questions. I hope the microphone works. Mistä toi saadaan päälle? Hello? Yes, this one works. Tämä toimii. Okay, yes. All right, so are there any questions at this point? Yeah, I see Mark Shaw, and then Julia, Inka, and Lauri. Yes, and then Kimmo. Okay, sorry, now I need to write you down because there's so many of you. Just a moment. Mark, Julia, Kimmo, Lauri, and then we have there. Okay, yes, Tapio. All right, Mark, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the excellent 3 presentations. They really were very good. 2 very brief questions. The first, in Andrea's excellent overview, the issue that doesn't come up, and I would be interested in your response, is in fact the platform on which the changes you are talking about are occurring is private. And it's held in very limited number of hands. And the incentives for maintaining the platform to generate profit are very strong. And that's fundamentally different, I think, from the past, let's call it social or physical platforms where crime occurs. There's a subtext to that, which is that platform is probably more fragile than we think. When the server or whatever goes down in Virginia, the whole world is, that's a slightly a separate issue, but I think it's of some concern to a discussion about the future. And so this engagement with tech companies and individual tech moguls becomes a key part of crime prevention engagement and the like, and I'd really like your comments on that, because I think it's key to our global engagement around what is happening. The second point is Ari and Matti's presentation. We are about to release in a couple of days the Global Organized Crime Index Survey, the third sweep. And what it shows, which is troubling, and we don't want it to be the case, it shows an upswing of organized crime. There's some exceptions, but globally and in Europe. And so there's this disjuncture between, which comes out of both of what you are saying, between global organized illicit market-related crime and ordinary crime, as measured in surveys, etc. That's not true globally, but it's true in Europe. And I wonder whether, in fact, the challenge for us working in the sphere of criminology is that we're not measuring the right things anymore. So our criminal justice statistics are no longer fit for purpose. They are good for some things, but we are in such a dramatic period of change, we are still using almost prehistoric tools of measuring insecurity. And that's the challenge for us. The index, I feel, is part of that. It's not perfect, but it's an attempt to begin to do that. And the complexities of doing that are very, very real, because it's difficult to keep your measures only to national or local. You need global forms of interaction to measure trends. Thanks, Natalia.
Mark, can you just say who you are? Sorry, please everybody introduce yourself.
My name is Mark Shaw. I'm the director of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime.
And a member of the HEUNI board. Next we have Julia Korkman, please.
Thank you. So I was already introduced by my boss. I'm Julia Korkman from HEUNI. My question would probably be most directed to Andrea, and thank you all speakers for really, really good presentations. Where do you see the most interesting sort of responses to the increasingly digitalized crime in terms of responding to crime?
Was it Inka? I think it was Inka. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm Inka Lilja from the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance. Thank you for the excellent presentations. I am wondering, because Andrew talked about the social reaction to crime in online environment. Would you have any examples of kind of positive reaction? I mean, we have those reactions where we admire violent behavior, for example, but any positive examples? And then also related to that, kind of, do you have any examples of digital punishment? And this really, triggered me when we talked about youth crime, because as a mother of a preteen, nothing is more more functioning punishment than taking away, for example, access to social media. So I was thinking about that. And then finally, what really also I really liked in Ari's presentation was this foresight, not only for threats, but for positive scenarios or for opportunities, because that's exactly what we see in security institutions and in law enforcement. We always look at the threats, and then also all the priorities and resources go into that and not into prevention, which is of course a very old discussion in criminology, that prevention works, but all the money goes into guns and hard measures. Thank you.
Thanks. I think we'll take all the questions and then you can answer. And then I think we had Lauri, perhaps, over here.
Many thanks. Good day, all. I'm Lauri Rautio from Finnish Ministry of Justice. Again, many thanks for very interesting presentations. Since we are talking about future, since I come from the ministry, I was wondering, it's more of a comment maybe than a question, what would be the time frame we should look at? I mean, 5, 10, 15 years. you all mentioned basically how hard, how difficult it is to predict the future. And then from a political perspective, the politicians, they will have to react. I mean, the next elections will be on the way in 2, 3, 4 years, and in that sense, the time frame is pretty short, and at the same time, you'll have to explain why it is so important to try to see, at least to try to see the future, and to put some resources there as well. So it's not only the insecurities, it's also the way our political system works that makes us sort of more to react sometimes than to plan. However, coming from the ministry again, I'm sure we want to work and prepare to the future, not only to react. So yeah, this one from here. Thank you.
And then I believe it was Kimmo.
Yeah, hi. So Kimmo Nuoti, I'm the director of the Krimo Institute, and I have a legal background. And to the first speaker, Andrea, so I somehow liked it very much that you were stressing that this kind of future orientation and the sort of digital interest in criminology also like necessitates that you need to be more interdisciplinary, and yet you wanted to do things which is relevant for like policy making as well. And I think, you know, amongst the Finnish criminologists, there has been a little bit like a hesitance to be very active in, like, you know, policy making debates, but rather like, you know, just more like providing information and letting other people to do the job. And I think this is it's a very interesting to hear that you have this kind of a pragmatic thing, that you are, you know, involved in those projects where you then combine different types of information, and I think this is really the future also of criminological work, that it needs to be, when getting interdisciplinary, getting more active in those policy networks. And then the other point I wanted to say, that somehow I feel also that in criminological work we should stress more also the role of the, let's say, companies, businesses, like, you know, not just looking at the individual actors and victims, etc., that we need to do the surveys, we need to look at, you know, how the businesses are reacting, because also the, like, crime prevention part, the businesses are super influential. If you think about the, let's say, the internet frauds or stuff, you know, the banks are the ones who control the payments. They identify the sort of, you know, let's say, criminal networks in there. They are the ones who are stopping the payments. They do their analysis, etc. So I think we need to understand much more what's happening in the private sector. But thanks for very great speeches.
Thanks, Kim. And then finally we had Jari Taponen. I think, okay, we can take one more question then. It was first Jari, and then we give the speakers a chance to respond. Please.
My name is Jari Taponen. I'm a founder of Prevenza Oy. Thank you, very great presentations. My question goes to Matti and Ari. The first question is that we know the big picture is that youth crime is decreasing, and also at the same time it's true that crime is becoming concentrated among a small group. But is there really evidence that the criminal activity of this small group has increased over time? And the second, because the belief is like that. The second question goes to Ari, that in the Ministry of Interior's security review, which is still, I think it's unpublished, young people are mentioned only once. Their young people are seen as a security threat. At the same time, we know that now that young people have lost their faith in future for many different reasons, which are specifically related to decisions made by adults, authorities, and politicians. So should we be taken should we take it in consideration in this decision making? Do we adults generate the polarization between adults and youths? Thanks.
Thank you. And then the final question, Sampsa from the police. Welcome.
Hello, I'm Detective Chief Inspector Sampsa Aukio from Eastern Uusimaa Police Department, Juvenile Crime Investigation. And as far as I can, this is like a really close to the previous question. According to police reports, the youth crime levels has been rising since 2016. So it's like doubled. So this question is to Matti and maybe Ari as well. But because of the victim survey data says that there is no increase in violent crimes in the youths in the past decade or so. So if we have the more reports about these crimes, but now not the same level of the experience on the victims, what does this tell us and how we should respond to this information, this gap between the reports and the victim feelings?
Thank you. So Andrea, if you start, I'll bring you the mic, or maybe Jenna can give that mic.
Okay, wow. How many hours do I have?
You have like 3 minutes.
I'll be very brief. Mark, starting from Mark. A brief history. 12 years ago, Facebook was full of advertisements of social traffickers and social smugglers. It is still full of advertisement. And it's a crime, yes, it is a crime. It's a part of a chain, smuggling migrants and trafficking human beings. So it's there. It's wonderful. If you want to investigate and have telephone numbers, you just reach their numbers. I have called with interpreters, severals, probably dozens of smugglers. They are still there. 12 years ago, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, they were full of advertisement about fake medicines. They are not anymore there. Why? Because big medicine companies have pressure, have power, convince social media to change their habits. This is a totally private affair. So I totally understand what you're saying, I totally agree with what you're saying. It's difficult in 45 minutes to tell you what I would like to tell you, but in a way the powers nowadays in the hands, as you said, of few players, is very difficult to make them change their habits and minds. There's money involved, but still it is the problem that we have to face. Also regarding organized crime and regarding the reach of organized crime, for instance, that they have through social media with young people. So private code, private regulation, private rules are part of this informal new social control that we have to take care of. Totally agree that we are not measuring anymore what the right thing, and that's I think also there's also a momentum for criminology to speak and to understand the new way of measuring also new concepts, and this is very relevant also for evidence-based policy. Julia and Inga, did I do correctly the name or something like that? Sorry. Responses and example of social reaction. Several applications for urban security, for urban violence, for urban violence of people that you can use. Software for assisting victims of usury. Software for understanding more advanced, also related to forecast for understanding of causes of crime. Software for identifying evidence online, and so on and so forth. But still, what I think is that the informal social reaction has negative aspects until now. So all the examples are not positive of social and informal reaction, because they amplify virality, they amplify stigma, and this is the reason why there is the only digital criminology nowadays are critical criminologists, because they think that all this is bad. What I think instead is that we are not controlling this process. And if we don't step in this process, we don't understand the limits, the pros and the cons, we won't divert all these negative aspects into positive aspects. And I think this is and then I have plenty of examples that I would need really time. Example related to people, digital crowds help in a positive way, police, wherever, law enforcement are capable of controlling this process, because if they are not, this could become very, very risky. Social media campaigns that are positive, so there are examples, but still it's like, you can use media in general in a positive or in a negative way. It depends on our capacity. So the time frame is short. I don't know how much, but it's really short, and I think I end up here. Otherwise, of course, I share your view about companies and industries, and how one of my favorite criminologies is Sutherland. I've always studied economic crime, white-collar crime, and this kind of approach, and I think that it's still underdeveloped, and in terms also of resources and sources of information that we may also have from industry. It's been a wonderful time. Thank you all for your questions. And
thanks, Andrea. And then Ari.
Thank you. I was reaching for the microphone, so kindly handed to me by Natalia. Very briefly, I think what really resonated with Mark was saying was, just a minute, I'll take up my notes, in regards to the measures that indicate crime and kind of crime-related, how should I say, the general understanding of where we are. I couldn't agree more. I think and I think as exemplified also in the questions here, we have kind of contradictory statistics when looking at old school measures. We see that, like the one question that was posed, which I'll come into in a second, that we see a decline somewhere, but then we see an increase in reports somewhere. So we really need a deeper and more holistic understanding. In relation to, I guess, the political decision-making process, unfortunately, this kind of having a multitude of indicators is often challenging, as Pauline and Lauri know. The more we kind of provide measures, and we're required often to kind of provide easy answers, and when we say that, well, yes and no, but this indicates that and whatnot, and the question is nuanced. But as a whole, definitely, I do fully agree with that for at least our kind of practitioners and researchers and policy planners we need more nuanced tools, and perhaps things that might be a little bit out of the box even, that indicative kind of statistics and measures of where we're at, because we know that official reports, or not official reports, but say recorded crime, for example, this we've known of course for a long time, certainly in many phenomena doesn't kind of provide a full picture. In regards to the security report, Jari mentioned and the question of young people. One important frame regarding that is, of course, that it's a political document where it's given by the government, so it's not the Ministry of the Interior. Although we've of course prepared it in collaboration with other ministries and actors. So kind of the emphasis there has been in accordance with kind of the political will of the government, where the emphasis chosen was in relation to kind of the external threat scenario, so hybrid threats and things like that. Yes, there are things like violent radicalization and terrorism in there, and of course the mentioned part of young people and youth. And I agree with you definitely that I think it's and I'm not saying that this is prevalent in the report, but just on a general note, I think that when you alluded to that if there should be a concern between polarization between young people and adults, I definitely feel that's one of the axes of polarization that also feeds into kind of the social trust dynamic that we're currently interested in, and we should definitely kind of withhold from at least doing kind of making negative impacts into that, and I see it as a big policy question, not just within kind of that report. Also, there was Lauri's question in regards to how we should look at and view Foresight when the setting is so rapidly changing and decision making is more and more reactive, as we see every day, reactive and also needing simple answers and simple diagnoses. While this huge AI transition, the next internet, is happening, there's still luckily some things in relation to kind of humankind and humanity that are more static. If we start building a house today, it's faster than in the 80s, but it still takes time. If we build a harbor, it takes time. Demographic changes are still relatively slow, and things like this. So we at least have, and interestingly enough, for example, demographic changes are such that we haven't really kind of taken them into account, for example, within our foresight. And that's one of the things where when I speak to audiences not as well versed in the topic as you, I say that crime will probably continue to decrease. Why? In Finland, that is. Why? Well, because we have this monolith mega structure called aging of the population. We have less young men. We continue to have less young men. Crime will mathematically, arithmetically, it will decline in this country. It might change forms, new forms come up, or we'll have kind of external, even kind of computer-driven crimes where the actual actor is an AI program or a virus or whatnot instead of an actual human being and whatnot. Things like these, this will happen, but traditional crime will decline because of this kind of arithmetic truth. So, in brief, I think that we need to kind of look at the more slow-moving, or at least part of the solution is looking at the more slow-moving kind of biological, physical, physiological aspect of things that don't change as rapidly, and then look at how kind of these new changes, in which areas do they present a change? Because some things we are still grounded in and will be for a while. I just had a discussion with a taxi driver yesterday who was saying that, well, he's looking to get into IT. And I said, oh, interesting. Do you have any experience? No, not really. Okay. And so I was asking, well, are you looking at software or whatnot? No, software. And he was very strategic. I gathered he wasn't really well educated because he's saying he was starting to take courses. So I said, no, I'm not really well educated, but he was quite strategic about it. He said that I'm not looking into getting into software because that train has kind of passed. He needs formal education and whatnot, but he's looking to get into networking. I'm like, networks? What do you mean by networking? Well, you know, building cables between different computers. And I'm like, yeah, true, that won't be done by machines in, say, homes or this type of setting in a while, because robots still will for some time have a hard time navigating kind of these irregular shapes and whatnot. You can look at the wall and they'll say, pull the cord from there to there, but we still don't have those robots, even though Boston Dynamics claim that they might have. We don't have the robots that will actually go in this setting and then go to a private home and do it and whatnot. So we'll need that guy to build the networks. So some of these things are still quite constant. So, say, for example, demographic change. And I think we at least can build upon that, even though we have more unknowns than we did previously. Sorry. Long answer.
Thank you. And we're running a bit over time, but very quickly, Matti, some final comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the last two questions are not really quick comments, but in general, I think I'm going to focus on those two. So, yes, measuring crime is not an easy thing. We do it either through surveys, or we have statistics from official statistics. With youth, we've seen those under 15 in Finland, the past 10 years, I think there's about 6 times more reported violence offenses than there was 2016. So at the past 2 years, the trend has been going through the roof. At the same time, we have survey systems, not just ours, but all the survey systems that are looking at these things, they look sort of a flat line. So there's a clear difference there. I think there's a couple of things, or few things that explain these different trends, and I think why we need more systems to measure crime is that, yes, we have legal changes, so we have obligations from teachers, people working with youth that they need to report offenses when they happen. They happen in kindergarten, they happen in school, they happen in all these settings. I think when we discuss youth and those under 15 who are not criminal responsible, I think the society has changed in terms of how they target these people. So I think with youth, I think it's still a pretty good reflection that those who are 12, 13, 14, they are violent. I think they're amongst the more violent groups in youth that generally are. But now we are measuring those. We are taking them into the system, even though we won't punish them officially, but they're being taken into the system. And I think a lot of these things, they used to be handled internally, perhaps in schools, or in some other settings. At the same time, we also have youth that they do gather a lot of problems. They do gather a lot of offenses in a short period of time. And they might also play a role in that. There's a room that we have a group of youth that collect problems, and they also show in these trends. But I think one of the biggest challenges at the moment is that we have the Krimo law, that we are required to study this phenomenon. And it includes also to receiving the data from the police, which we haven't had in the past 8 years. So from our perspective, it's really difficult to address that issue with the police recorded data because we don't have the data. So we can only talk through our systems. So I think if the collaboration with this data sharing and cooperation increases in the future, we might be better suited to answer this question. So for me, it's more speculation in terms of the police trends than the knowledge, but it is an interesting sort of mismatch that we hopefully can target in the future. So thank you for everyone.
Well, thank you, everyone. This concludes our very interesting session. Thanks, everybody, for attending, and thank you.